There is a place on this earth that the Bible described over 3,000 years ago, and today scientists, archaeologists, and geologists have confirmed it is exactly where the Bible said it would be. But here is what nobody is telling you. This is not one place. This is not two places. Some are buried under modern cities. Some are sitting at the bottom of the ocean. Some are hiding in plain sight, and you could visit them tomorrow. And every single one of them answers the question that billions of people have asked for centuries. Is what we read in the Bible actually true? Because here is what the mainstream refuses to say out loud. When you line up the Bible's descriptions with what archaeologists have pulled out of the ground, the match is not close. It is exact, word for word. There is a city that was destroyed by a fireball so intense that it turned solid clay into glass. There is a river that stopped flowing for 21 hours, exactly as the Bible described. There is a 2,000-year-old inscription carved in stone that proves a man the world once called a myth actually existed and actually signed the death warrant of Jesus Christ. There is a scroll made of pure copper that contains the location of 26 tons of gold and 65 tons of silver that has never been found. And there is a hill that has been the battleground of every major empire in human history, and the Bible says it will be the stage for the final war of mankind. We are about to travel across thousands of years of history, and by the time we reach the last one, you will not be asking whether the Bible is true anymore. You will be asking yourself why no one ever showed you this proof before. So stay with me, because what comes next will change the way you see history forever. Location 1. The Dead Sea Scrolls. Just 1 kilometer from the Dead Sea, in the heart of the Judean desert, lies a place called Qumran, and what was discovered here is without question one of the most important finds in the entire history of human civilization. For centuries, critics of the Bible had one powerful argument. They said the Bible was a late text, heavily manipulated, copied and recopied so many times over 1,000 years that what we read today would bear almost no resemblance to what was originally written. And for a long time, that argument had weight behind it, because the oldest copies of the Bible that existed dated back to only around 1000 AD. That left a gap of more than 1,000 years unaccounted for. 1,000 years during which skeptics insisted the texts had been altered, edited, and rewritten to serve whoever was in power at the time. Then, in 1947, everything changed. And the way it changed sounds less like history and more like the opening scene of an adventure film. A young Bedouin shepherd was out on the limestone cliffs searching for a lost goat. To check whether the animal was hiding inside one of the narrow cave openings in the rock face, he did what any young boy would do. He picked up a stone and threw it inside. But instead of silence or the sound of a frightened animal, he heard something completely unexpected, the sharp crack of breaking pottery echoing from deep inside the cave. When he climbed in to investigate, what he found sitting in the darkness, untouched and perfectly preserved, were several sealed clay jars. And inside those jars, wrapped carefully in linen cloth, were ancient parchment scrolls that had been sitting there completely undisturbed for more than 2,000 years. That Bedouin shepherd had just stumbled onto what would become known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. What those scrolls contained was staggering. Copies of every single book of the Old Testament except one, the Book of Esther. These manuscripts dated from the 3rd century BC all the way up to 68 AD, meaning these were writings that existed before Jesus was born and during his own lifetime. But the real moment of truth came when experts sat down and compared these ancient manuscripts side by side with the modern Hebrew Bible that people read in churches and synagogues today. What they found left the academic world speechless. The texts were practically identical. The same words, the same phrases, the same passages, the same meaning. Take the great Isaiah scroll as the clearest example. This single scroll is 7 meters long, making it roughly 23 feet of continuous ancient text, and it is 1,000 years older than any copy of Isaiah that existed before this discovery. When scholars placed it next to the book of Isaiah in the Bible you can buy in any bookstore today, the match came in at 95%, essentially identical. And the remaining 5% were nothing more than minor spelling variations and small scribal differences that do not change a single word of meaning. The conclusion was devastating for everyone who had spent decades arguing the Bible had been rewritten and corrupted over time. It had not been rewritten. The Bible that people read today is the same Bible that people read in the time of Jesus Christ. But Qumran was not finished revealing its secrets. When archaeologists expanded their search into the surrounding cliffs, they uncovered the ruins of an ancient settlement that had once been home to a mysterious Jewish community known as the Essenes. These were a group of deeply devout Jews who had withdrawn completely from society and retreated into the desert in pursuit of absolute spiritual purity. They lived by strict communal rules. They dedicated their lives to the precise hand-copying of Scripture. And they were waiting and watching for what they believed was the imminent arrival of God's final judgment on the world. Then, in 68 AD, as the Roman army began its devastating march toward Jerusalem, the Essenes understood that everything they had built and everything they had preserved was about to be destroyed. So in a desperate rush, they packed their life's work into those clay jars, sealed them shut, and hid them deep inside the caves of the cliffs above Qumran. And then they were gone. What saved those scrolls from the 2,000 years that followed was the unique environment of the Dead Sea region itself. The extreme dryness of the desert air, the salt that saturates everything, and the near-total absence of moisture created conditions that function like a natural time capsule, preserving fragile parchment and linen with remarkable perfection. After that first cave was discovered, explorers systematically searched hundreds more in the surrounding area. In 11 of those caves, they recovered a total of 930 scrolls, along with more than 50,000 individual fragments. But among all of them, one particular discovery stood completely apart from everything else and defied every expectation archaeologists had ever formed. In 1952, inside cave number 3, they found something that had absolutely no business being there. A scroll made not of parchment or papyrus, but of nearly pure copper. This was baffling on every level because copper was not used for writing in the ancient world. It was extraordinarily expensive, incredibly difficult to engrave, and entirely impractical as a writing surface. By the time it was discovered, centuries of corrosion had left it so brittle and damaged that attempting to unroll it would have caused it to crumble into dust. So it was carefully transported to Manchester, where specialists used a saw of surgical precision to cut it into 23 individual strips so the text inside could finally be read. And when they fitted those strips together and translated what was written, what they found stunned every scholar and historian who laid eyes on it. It was not a biblical text at all. It was a treasure map, the greatest treasure map in the entire history of human archaeology. The copper scroll turned out to be a detailed inventory listing 64 specific locations where an almost incomprehensible amount of wealth had been hidden. 26 tons of gold, 65 tons of silver, sacred incense and priestly garments from the temple in Jerusalem. The sheer scale of this hidden wealth makes it immediately clear that it could not have belonged to the small community living at Qumran. Scholars are in broad agreement that what the copper scroll describes is the actual treasury of Jerusalem's second temple, hidden in haste before the Roman legions arrived to destroy the city. The theory is that the temple's guardians, facing the unstoppable advance of Rome, removed Jerusalem's entire gold reserve and buried it across 64 separate locations throughout the desert, then created this copper record so that after the war the survivors could return and reclaim what belonged to their people and their God. And here is where it gets truly extraordinary. No one has ever found it. Despite the precise descriptions of tunnels, cisterns, wells, and caves listed in the scroll, despite decades of searching by some of the world's most determined archaeologists, not a single one of those 64 hiding places has been successfully located. The landscape has changed too dramatically over 2,000 years of earthquakes and erosion. The landmarks described in the text have vanished. Some researchers believe the instructions were written in a coded system of measurements known only to a select group of temple insiders. Others believe the Romans may have tortured the locations out of prisoners during the siege. The copper scroll today sits in the Jordan Museum in Amman, and researchers are still working to decode its secrets. If even one of those 64 locations is ever found, it will be the single greatest archaeological discovery in the history of the world. But beyond the treasure, beyond the scrolls, beyond the copper and the clay jars and the cave, Qumran's greatest gift to humanity is simpler and more powerful than all of it. It proved beyond any reasonable doubt that the Bible was not invented, not manipulated, and not rewritten. It was preserved, exactly as it was written, and that changes everything. Location 2, the Dead Sea and Sodom and Gomorrah. Just 1 kilometer from those ancient caves, The landscape opens up into something that feels almost alien. You are standing at the lowest point on the entire surface of the planet, 430 meters below sea level. The Dead Sea, and the first thing that strikes you is the silence. There are no birds, no fish breaking the surface, no insects, no sound of life anywhere. Just the slow, steady evaporation of water rising off a lake so saturated with salt and minerals that it is nearly 10 times saltier than any ocean on Earth. If you step into it, you cannot sink. The density of the water simply holds your body up as though the basic laws of physics decided they did not apply here. It is one of the strangest and most disorienting experiences a human being can have standing on the surface of this planet. But here is what makes the Dead Sea extraordinary beyond its chemistry and its geography. The Bible tells us that 4,000 years ago, this exact place looked nothing like what you see today. Where there is now a barren, lifeless salt flat, there was once the most fertile and prosperous agricultural region in the entire ancient Near East. The Bible calls it the Kar, the Jordan Valley Basin, and it describes it as a vast tropical paradise, lush with vegetation, fed by abundant fresh water and rich enough to sustain 5 major wealthy cities. The text in Genesis describes it as being like the Garden of God. And among those 5 cities were 2 whose names have echoed through human history for thousands of years: Sodom and Gomorrah. According to Genesis, these were cities that had become so thoroughly corrupt, so saturated with violence, injustice, and the abuse of the weak, that God chose to intervene directly and decisively. The Bible says that fire and sulfur rained down from the sky, that the cities were wiped out within moments, and that the entire plain was left in a state of total and permanent desolation. For centuries, this account was dismissed by scholars and historians as nothing more than a moral fable, an exaggerated cautionary tale with no basis in actual history. Critics called it mythology. They said no evidence existed. They said the story was invented to teach a lesson and nothing more. And then science decided to actually look. In 2021, an international team of researchers turned their attention to an archaeological site called Tal el-Hammam, located just a few miles northeast of the Dead Sea, in what is today the country of Jordan. This site had been under excavation for years, but what the team uncovered and documented in their 2021 scientific study was unlike anything that had ever been found in the region before. When they dug into the ruins of a city that had existed at this location approximately 3,600 years ago, they found something that should not have been possible. They found a thick layer of ash, several meters deep, covering the entire site. They found mud bricks that had been completely melted. And most shockingly of all, they found pottery that had been transformed into glass. That last detail was the one that stopped scientists cold. To turn clay pottery into glass requires temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius. That is hotter than the surface of most volcanic lava flows. There is no natural geological process that generates that kind of heat at ground level in that region. No volcano, no lava, no ordinary fire. The study documented a sudden, instantaneous, and catastrophically violent destruction event that struck the city approximately 3,600 years ago. And after examining every possible explanation, the scientific team reached a conclusion that aligned perfectly with something written in the book of Genesis thousands of years ago. A meteor or cosmic impact event, specifically an airburst, exploded over the city with a force estimated to be approximately 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The shock wave and thermal pulse would have vaporized everything within its radius in a matter of seconds. But the research did not stop there, and what came next is the detail that truly connects this scientific discovery to the biblical account in a way that is almost impossible to dismiss. The study found evidence that the extreme heat generated by this event was so intense that it instantly evaporated massive quantities of water from the Dead Sea and set a superheated rain of salt and mineral debris across the entire surrounding plain. Now open your Bible to Genesis and read what it says about Lot's wife, the woman who stopped and looked back at the destruction and was turned into a pillar of salt. For thousands of years, that detail was read as a miracle, a supernatural punishment. But the science now suggests something far more precise. A rain of boiling, salt-laden water and debris falling across the plain would have been instantly lethal to anyone caught in the open, and the residue it left behind would have been exactly what Genesis describes. The research also revealed something else buried in the geology of the Dead Sea region that lines up with the biblical account with uncomfortable precision. The entire valley sits on an active geological fault line. Beneath the surface, there are enormous underground deposits of both methane gas and natural sulfur. An impact event or a major seismic event could have triggered those underground deposits to ignite and explode simultaneously, unleashing a wave of superheated gas, fire, and sulfurous material powerful enough to level structures, vaporize water sources, and incinerate an entire urban area within seconds. The Bible specifically says that fire and sulfur fell from the sky over Sodom and Gomorrah. The geology of the region confirms that sulfur is there in quantities that exist nowhere else on Earth in quite the same way. And if you visit the cliffs around the Dead Sea today, you can find the physical evidence yourself with your own hands. Embedded in the rock faces of those cliffs are small, perfectly round balls of nearly pure elemental sulfur. Geologists have noted that this kind of formation is extraordinarily unusual. If you pry one of those sulfur balls from the rock and hold a flame to it, it ignites almost instantly, burning with an intense blue flame and releasing the sharp, unmistakable smell of burning sulfur. Many researchers who have studied this region believe those sulfur nodules are the literal physical residue of the event described in Genesis, the rain of fire and sulfur that the Bible says fell from the sky over the cities of the plain. And then there is the aftermath, which the Bible also described and which archaeology has now confirmed. The text says the region was left completely desolate, that no one returned to live there for generations. Excavations at Tal El Hammam confirm exactly that. After the destruction event 3,600 years ago, the site was abandoned for a period of several centuries. The soil became so saturated with salt and mineral deposits from the disaster that agriculture became impossible. The land literally could not support life. Neighboring settlements were also abandoned during the same period. An entire region that had been one of the most densely populated and agriculturally productive areas in the ancient Near East simply went silent, just as Genesis said it would. Today, when you stand at the edge of the Dead Sea and look out across that flat, white, silent expanse, you are not just looking at a geological curiosity. You are looking at the aftermath of one of the most catastrophic events in recorded human history. An event the Bible described in precise detail thousands of years before science had the tools to confirm it. Location 3. The Jordan River. Follow the water north from the Dead Sea, and within a few miles, the landscape begins to change. The salt flats give way to scrubby green vegetation, and then you hear it before you see it. The quiet, steady sound of moving water. And then it comes into view, the Jordan River, the most famous river in the entire world. And the first thing that strikes almost every visitor who sees it for the first time is how completely different it looks from what they imagine. This is not the mighty, wide, powerful river that the name conjures in the imagination. What you find is a narrow, winding stream, often murky and brown, threading its way through a dense tangle of reeds and vegetation. In some stretches, it is barely wide enough to throw a stone across. It looks, frankly, unremarkable. And yet this river has shaped the course of human civilization more profoundly than almost any other body of water on Earth. The Bible does not present the Jordan as just a river. It presents it as a frontier, a boundary, a threshold between one world and another. And the first great test of that frontier came at one of the most dramatic moments in the entire Old Testament. After 40 years of wandering through the wilderness, the people of Israel had finally reached the edge of the Promised Land. They stood on the eastern bank of the Jordan, and on the other side lay everything God had promised them. But there was a problem that the Bible describes with a detail so specific, it becomes its own form of evidence. It was harvest season, and at harvest time, fed by the snowmelt from the mountains of the north, the Jordan did not flow gently. It flooded. It burst its banks and spread across the entire plain, turning the river crossing into something that an army carrying supplies, livestock, women, and children simply could not attempt. For years, this detail in the text was challenged by critics who said it was an exaggeration designed to make the miracle more dramatic. Then modern hydrological studies stepped in. Researchers examining the historical behavior of the Jordan before the construction of modern dams and irrigation systems confirmed that every spring, without exception, the river flooded dramatically, overflowing its banks and creating a wide, dangerous natural barrier across the valley floor. The Bible was not exaggerating. It was describing documented physical reality. But then comes the moment the book of Joshua describes that pushed the argument even further. The priests carried the Ark of the Covenant to the edge of the water and stepped in. And the moment their feet touched the river, the text says, the water coming from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up at a place called Adam, near a town called Zarethan, and the water downstream continued draining into the Dead Sea until the entire riverbed was dry and the people crossed on solid ground. For generations, this was held up as one of the clearest examples of biblical mythology, an impossible supernatural event invented to glorify the moment of Israel's entry into the Promised Land. And then geologists began studying the Jordan Valley in detail and found something that changed the conversation entirely. The Jordan Valley sits in one of the most seismically active zones in the entire Middle East. The valley is part of the same massive geological fault system that runs all the way down through East Africa. And throughout recorded history, earthquakes in this region have repeatedly triggered massive landslides from the high clay cliffs that line the upper Jordan Valley. These landslides have on multiple occasions sent enormous quantities of earth and rock tumbling into the river channel, completely blocking the flow and creating a natural dam upstream, while the water downstream continued draining away until the riverbed was dry. This is not theory. It is documented historical fact. Geologists and historians have identified at least 6 separate occasions in recorded history when this exact phenomenon occurred at the Jordan River. And the most recent example is so precisely parallel to the biblical account that it deserves to be stated clearly and directly. In 1927, an earthquake triggered a massive clay landslide at the cliffs near the ancient town of Adam, which is the exact location named in the book of Joshua. The river was completely blocked. And for 21 hours, the Jordan River ran dry. For 21 hours, anyone who wanted to could have walked across the exposed riverbed on foot. The impossible thing that critics called mythology happened again in living memory and was recorded by modern observers with complete scientific documentation. But the Jordan River holds one more discovery that took decades of political history to make possible. The most sacred moment in Christian history that is connected to this river, the baptism of Jesus, had long been a subject of debate because no one could agree on the exact location where it happened. There was, however, a remarkable clue hiding in plain sight in the country of Jordan. In the ancient city of Madaba, there is a church floor covered in a 6th century mosaic map, the oldest surviving cartographic representation of the Holy Land. And on that map, among the depictions of cities and roads and geographical features, there is a specific marking indicating the location where Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist on the eastern bank of the Jordan. For years, that site was inaccessible, sitting in a military zone near the border between Jordan and Israel. Then, in the 1990s, following the peace accords between the two countries, archaeologists were finally permitted to excavate the area that the Madaba map had been pointing to for 1,500 years. And what they found when they began to dig exceeded every expectation anyone had brought to the site. They uncovered the remains of 5 separate Byzantine churches built directly on and around the riverbank at that location. One of those churches had been constructed directly over a cave that the earliest Christian communities had venerated and identified as the place where John the Baptist had lived during his time in the wilderness. And then on the riverbank itself, they found the evidence that settled the question definitively. A large marble structure with a broad staircase descending directly into the water. It was a cross-shaped baptismal pool, purpose-built for full immersion, and surrounding it, carved into the bedrock of the riverbank, were additional smaller pools also designed for collective immersion rituals. The conclusion was unavoidable and profound. The earliest Christians, the people who lived closest in time to the events of the Gospels, knew exactly where the baptism of Jesus had taken place. They knew it with enough certainty that they built not 1 but 5 churches to mark and protect that precise location. And they left those markers there for us to find 1,500 years later. The archaeologists also found throughout that same area extensive remains of Roman roads, military checkpoints, and administrative structures that confirm something important about the geographical and political reality of the moment described in the Gospels. The Jordan River in the time of Jesus was a genuine political border. Crossing it meant moving from one jurisdiction into another, from the territory controlled by one ruler into the territory controlled by a different ruler. Which means that when Jesus walked to this river and was baptized by John, he was not simply performing a religious ritual. He was crossing a border. He was stepping from one world into another. He was making a public declaration that his ministry had begun. And the archaeology of this riverbank confirms that every physical detail of that moment, the location, the political significance, the geography, the structures built to mark it, all of it is grounded in documented historical reality. Today, the Jordan River exists in a state that stands in painful contrast to its biblical and historical significance. In the time of Joshua and Jesus, it was a powerful, dangerous, flood-prone river that commanded respect and defined borders. Today, as a result of decades of water diversion for agriculture and human consumption across Israel, Jordan, and Syria, the river has lost approximately 95% of its original flow. In some stretches during the dry season, it is reduced to little more than a polluted trickle, barely able to reach the Dead Sea at all. And that connection matters more than most people realize. Because the Dead Sea has no outlet, the only water it receives comes from the Jordan. And as the Jordan shrinks, the Dead Sea shrinks with it, receding by more than a meter every single year. Two of the most historically and biblically significant bodies of water on Earth are disappearing together, and the world is paying almost no attention. Location 4. Gilgal and the footprint stones after crossing the Jordan on dry ground. The people of Israel did not march immediately into battle. They stopped. They made camp. And the place where they set up that first camp on the soil of the Promised Land was a desert plain called Gilgal, just 5 miles east of the river they had just crossed. And what happened at Gilgal was not just a military pause. It was a declaration. A statement made in stone that was so specific, so deliberate, and so perfectly aligned with the biblical text that when archaeologists finally understood what they were looking at, it stopped them completely in their tracks. The Bible tells us that at Gilgal, Joshua took 12 stones from the dry bed of the Jordan River, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel, and set them up as a memorial, a permanent physical marker to remind every future generation of what God had done at that river. For decades, archaeologists searched for Gilgal and found nothing. They were looking for what they expected to find, the ruins of a city with walls and towers and streets and buildings, the kind of physical footprint that ancient settlements typically leave behind in the archaeological record. But Gilgal was not a city, and that assumption cost them years of searching in completely the wrong direction. It took an archaeologist named Adam Zertal to break from convention and approach the search from an entirely different angle. Instead of digging, he looked up. He began studying the landscape of the Jordan Valley from aerial photographs and satellite imagery. And what he saw from above, hidden in the terrain in a way that was completely invisible from ground level, changed everything. Scattered across the landscape of the Jordan Valley, Zertal identified 5 massive stone structures. Each one was enormous, some spanning an area equivalent to several full-size soccer fields laid side by side. And each one, when viewed from directly above, had the unmistakable shape of a giant human footprint, complete with the outline of a heel, an arch, and 5 toes rendered in carefully arranged ancient stonework. These structures are known in Hebrew as Gilgalim, which is the plural form of the word Gilgal, and the word itself is connected to the concept of a circle or a rounded shape. But it was not just the shape that connected these structures to the biblical account. It was the meaning behind the shape that made everything click into place. Because when you go back to the book of Joshua and read it carefully, you find that God repeats one particular promise to Joshua again and again throughout the early chapters of the book. The promise is always stated in the same terms. Every place where the sole of your foot treads, I have given to you, just as I promised Moses. That is not poetic language. In the ancient Near East, the act of physically treading on land with the sole of your foot was a legally recognized act of claiming ownership. It was the equivalent of signing a deed. To place your foot on ground was to declare before witnesses that the ground belonged to you. And so, when the Israelites arrived in the Promised Land after 40 years in the wilderness, they did not simply make camp and move on. They built permanent, massive, unmissable stone monuments in the shape of giant human feet to declare to every nation around them and to every generation that would come after them that this land already had an owner, that God had given it to them, and that they had set the sole of their foot upon it. But these structures were not cities, and they were not fortresses. The archaeological evidence makes clear that they were open-air sacred spaces, temples without roofs, places of worship and ceremony. and the detail that reveals how they were used is one of the most fascinating small discoveries in the entire archaeology of this region. Each of the footprint-shaped enclosures has a carefully paved corridor that runs along the entire outer edge of the structure, tracing the exact outline of the footprint from heel to toe and all the way around. Archaeologists studying the wear patterns and construction of these corridors concluded that they were processional paths. The people walked in a continuous circuit along that outer rim, literally treading the outline of the footprint with their own feet during religious ceremonies and festivals. They were reenacting the act of claiming the land every time they gathered to worship. They were physically, bodily, repeatedly performing the promise God had made to them, and the Hebrew language itself contains a clue that confirms this interpretation. The ancient Hebrew word for a religious feast or festival is the word hag, and the root meaning of that word is to move in a circle. Every time the Israelites held a festival at these sites, every time they walked in procession around those stone footprints, the very word they used to describe what they were doing encoded the circular motion of the ceremony itself. The language and the archaeology point in exactly the same direction. These people were not just remembering a promise, they were performing it. They were acting it out in stone and in movement and in the word they chose to name the occasion. Today, these remarkable structures are among the most compelling pieces of physical evidence that the biblical account of the conquest of Canaan is not mythology, but documented historical reality. They can be identified from satellite imagery. They have been measured and studied and dated. They exist, they are real, and they are shaped exactly like what the Bible said the Israelites would leave behind when they planted the sole of their foot on the soil of the land God had promised them. Standing at Gilgal today, looking out across the flat Jordan Valley toward the river in one direction and toward the hills of Canaan rising in the other, you begin to understand something about the people who built these monuments that no textbook quite captures. These were not primitive wanderers stumbling into a new land. These were a people who understood that history was watching, that what they did in that moment mattered not just for themselves, but for every generation that would come after. So they built something that could not be misunderstood. Something that said clearly and permanently without words, in the universal language of shape and stone, we were here, and this ground belongs to God and to His people. And 3,000 years later, from a satellite orbiting hundreds of miles above the surface of the earth, you can still see exactly what they meant. From the camp at Gilgal, the Israelites only had to lift their eyes to see what stood between them and everything God had promised. Just a few miles to the west, rising out of the desert floor, was the city of Jericho. And before we talk about what happened there, we need to understand what Jericho actually was, because the full weight of the biblical account only lands properly when you grasp the extraordinary nature of this city and what it represented to anyone who stood outside its walls in the ancient world. Jericho is not just a biblical location. It is the oldest continuously inhabited city on the face of the earth. Excavations at the site, known as Tel es-Sultan, have uncovered more than 20 distinct layers of human occupation stacked one on top of another. Some of those layers dating back more than 10,000 years. 10,000 years of people living, building, dying, and being replaced by the next civilization at this exact spot in the Jordan Valley. Which means that when the people of Israel arrived at Jericho after their 40 years in the wilderness, they were not looking at a young city. They were looking at a place that had already watched entire empires rise and collapse and be forgotten while it continued to stand. Jericho had outlasted everything, and it was ready to outlast Israel too. The Bible describes Jericho as an impregnable fortress, fully fortified, heavily defended, with a population so confident in the strength of their walls that when they heard Israel was coming, they simply locked the gates and waited. According to the text, the city was completely sealed. No one went in and no one came out. And what Israel did next made no military sense whatsoever by any conventional standard of ancient warfare. They did not bring siege engines. They did not dig tunnels under the walls. They did not starve the city into submission over months of encirclement. Instead, for 6 consecutive days, the entire Israelite army marched in complete silence around the outside of the city walls once each day and then returned to camp. No attack, no assault, no provocation. Just a silent, daily circuit of an enemy city whose defenders watched from the walls and presumably grew more confused with each passing day. Then on the 7th day, everything changed. On that day, instead of one circuit, the army marched around the city 7 times. And on the completion of the seventh circuit, the priests blew their trumpets. The entire people let out a single massive battle cry, and the walls of Jericho came down. But the Bible does not just say the walls fell. It says they fell outward, away from the city, toward the attacking army. And that specific directional detail, which might seem like a minor point of description, turned out to be the most archaeologically significant sentence in the entire account. Because walls do not typically fall outward. When a wall collapses under its own weight or from internal pressure, it falls inward. For the walls of Jericho to have fallen outward, something had to push them from the inside. And that is exactly what the archaeology found. For decades, the standard academic position on Jericho was one of confident dismissal. The most influential voice in that dismissal belonged to the British archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon, who excavated the site extensively in the 1950s and concluded that there was no evidence of walls at Jericho dating to the period of Joshua. Her findings were cited for years as definitive proof that the biblical account was fiction. But subsequent excavations, conducted with more advanced methods and greater attention to the specific layers of the site, revealed something that Kenyon's work had missed or misinterpreted. At the base of the ancient stone retaining wall that formed the lower defensive structure of the city, archaeologists found a massive pile of collapsed mud brick. And when they analyzed the direction of the collapse, the evidence was unambiguous. The bricks had fallen outward, away from the city, toward the ground outside the walls. Exactly as the book of Joshua describes. The pile of fallen brick had created precisely what the biblical text says it created, a ramp of debris running from the ground outside up to the top of the collapsed wall, allowing the Israelite soldiers to walk straight up and into the city without ladders or siege equipment of any kind. The most plausible explanation archaeologists have offered for why the walls fell in this specific and unusual direction is a powerful earthquake. The Jordan Valley is one of the most seismically active regions in the Middle East, and a sudden, violent seismic event striking at exactly the right moment would have the potential to produce exactly this kind of outward collapse. Whether that explanation fully satisfies you or raises further questions of its own is a matter you can decide for yourself. But the physical evidence is not in dispute. The walls fell. They fell outward. They created a ramp. And the Israelites walked straight in. Then the Bible adds another layer of detail that archaeology was eventually forced to confirm. After taking the city, Joshua commanded the Israelites to burn it. Everything inside, every structure, every storage room, every possession. The city was to be completely destroyed by fire, and nothing was to be taken as plunder. When excavators dug through the collapsed and burned remains of ancient Jericho, they found exactly what that command would have produced. A layer of ash and charcoal approximately 1 meter thick blanketing the entire destruction level. The fire had been so intense that the mud brick walls of the buildings had been baked as hard as kiln-fired pottery by the heat. And then, buried beneath that ash layer, they found something that answered a question the text had implicitly raised. Dozens of large storage jars, still sealed, still full of grain. That discovery carries two separate pieces of evidence packed into a single find. The presence of full-grain storage jars tells you first that the siege was extremely short. In a prolonged siege lasting months, the defenders would have eaten through their food supplies long before the city fell. The fact that the grain stores were full and untouched means the siege lasted almost no time at all, which aligns precisely with the biblical account of 7 days. And second, the fact that the grain was left behind untouched and unlooted tells you that the people who took the city deliberately chose not to take the food, which is exactly what the book of Joshua records. God specifically commanded the Israelites to take nothing from Jericho. No silver, no gold, no food, no possessions. Everything was to be left as an offering. And the archaeology confirms they obeyed. In an ancient world where conquering armies routinely stripped every city they took of every valuable item down to the last grain of wheat, the people who took Jericho walked away from a full pantry. That is not the behavior of looters. That is the behavior of a people following a specific and deliberate religious command. But there is one final detail in the Jericho account that seemed for a long time to be the one element of the story that archaeology simply could not address. The Bible tells the story of a woman named Rahab who lived inside the city of Jericho. She was a woman with a complicated reputation who had given shelter and protection to 2 Israelite spies Joshua had sent to scout the city before the army arrived. In exchange for her help, she was promised that when the city fell, her household would be spared, and the sign that would mark her home as a place of safety was a scarlet cord hung from her window. The Bible specifies that Rahab lived in a house built into the city wall itself, with a window that looked out over the outside of the wall, which is how she was able to lower the spies down by a rope and help them escape into the open country beyond the city. For a long time, scholars noted that this kind of living arrangement, houses built directly into the defensive wall of a city with windows opening outward, was architecturally unusual and questioned whether it was realistic. Then the excavations of the northern sector of the Jericho site revealed something that answered that question and raised an entirely new one. In the northern section of the ancient city, archaeologists found exactly what the text described: houses built directly against the inner face of the lower city wall with openings that faced outward. Casemate-style construction integrated directly into the defensive structure. The architectural detail the Bible described was not an invention. It was an accurate description of how part of this city was actually built. And then came the detail that no one had expected to find. In that same northern sector, at the very location where those wall-integrated houses were found, there was a section of the lower city wall that had not collapsed. While the walls everywhere else had fallen outward in the destruction, this specific section of the northern wall remained standing. The archaeologists who found it could not fully explain why. The same forces that brought down the rest of the walls had somehow left this one section intact. And the Bible had already told us exactly why one section of the wall of Jericho would still be standing when everything else had fallen. Because a woman named Rahab had hung a scarlet cord from her window, and a promise had been made that her house would not be destroyed. We started this journey with a single question, a question that billions of people across thousands of years have asked in moments of doubt, in moments of grief, in moments of wonder, and in moments of desperate need for something solid to hold on to. Is what we read in the Bible actually true? And we have let the evidence speak for itself. We stood at Qumran and held in our minds the image of those clay jars sitting untouched in the darkness of a desert cave for 2,000 years, preserving word for word the same text that sits in your Bible today. We looked out across the Dead Sea at the place where a city was destroyed by a fireball so intense it turned clay into glass, exactly as Genesis described it thousands of years before science had the tools to confirm it. We stood on the bank of the Jordan River, where a river ran dry for 21 hours in 1927, documented by modern observers, exactly as the book of Joshua said it had run dry 3,000 years before. We walked the outline of giant stone footprints in the Jordan Valley, where a people signed their name to a promise in the only language that time cannot erase, the language of stone. We stood outside Jericho, where walls fell outward, where grain jars sat full and untouched, and where one section of wall remained standing for a reason that defied every archaeological explanation except the one the Bible had already given. We descended beneath Jerusalem and touched the stones that Pontius Pilate's coins dated to the 1st century, walked the road to the Pool of Siloam, and ran our hands along the foundation wall of the most contested piece of real estate in human history. We bowed through the door of humility in Bethlehem and descended to the cave where the marble floor has been worn smooth by the hands of millions of people who came to touch the place where everything changed. We walked the limestone streets of Nazareth and stood in the 1st century house of a master builder whose most famous son grew up watching the world go by on the highway 4 miles away. We stood in Caesarea Maritima and looked at a limestone block with a name carved into it that proved beyond any reasonable doubt that the man who signed the death warrant of Jesus Christ was not a literary character but a real Roman official administering a real province at a real moment in history. We sat by the ruins of Capernaum at the edge of the Sea of Galilee and read the ancient inscriptions on the walls of a house that the earliest Christians identified and marked and protected because they knew exactly whose house it was. We climbed toward the summit of a mountain wrapped in mystery, where the silence is so deep you can hear your own heartbeat, and where a bush still grows that has never been successfully transplanted anywhere else on earth. We walked through the ruins of Babylon, where every brick in the foundation bears the name of the king who destroyed Jerusalem and whose own empire fell in a single night, exactly as the prophet Daniel foretold at a feast where the writing appeared on the wall. And we stood at Tel Megiddo and looked out across the valley where 26 civilizations have been buried one on top of another, each one certain it would last forever, each one wrong. 13 locations, 13 bodies of physical, documented, scientifically examined evidence. And the verdict is not complicated. It is not ambiguous. It is not a matter of interpretation or faith or wishful thinking. The science and the archaeology have spoken, and what they have said, clearly and repeatedly and in discipline after discipline, from geology to hydrology to epigraphy to architectural analysis, is yes. What you read in the Bible is true, not approximately true. Not true in a poetic or metaphorical sense. True in the most literal, physical, ground level. You can go there and touch it, sense of the word true. But here is what we have not yet told you. And this is the thing that no one ever puts at the end of a video like this, because it is the most uncomfortable truth of all. The evidence does not stop at 13 locations. It does not stop at scrolls and walls and inscriptions and pottery. There are objects, physical, tangible, testable objects that were present at the most pivotal moments in the story of Jesus Christ. Objects that were at the cross, objects that were at the tomb, objects that passed through the hands of the people who were there when the resurrection happened. And those objects still exist today. They have been examined by scientists. They have been dated. They have been tested. And what those tests have revealed is something that the mainstream has been remarkably reluctant to discuss with the same directness and honesty that the evidence demands. 10 artifacts connected directly to the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Still in existence, still being studied, still speaking. And in our next video, we are going to show you every single one of them, what they are, where they are, what the science says about them, and why taken together they constitute what may be the most compelling physical case for the resurrection that has ever been assembled in one place. If everything we have shown you today moved something in you, if the evidence landed the way evidence is supposed to land, then you cannot afford to miss what comes next. Because what comes next is the part of the story where the proof stops being about cities and walls and scrolls and becomes personal, becomes about a man, about 3 days, and about an empty tomb that nobody in 2,000 years of trying has ever been able to explain away. Hit the like button if this journey meant something to you. Not for the algorithm, not for the numbers, but because every like tells us that the truth is still worth pursuing and still worth sharing. Subscribe so you do not miss the next video, because we are not done. We have barely started. And share this with one person, just one, who is asking the question we started with today. Someone who needs to know that faith and evidence are not enemies. That the ground beneath the Bible is not sand, but bedrock. Bedrock that has been tested by every tool that science has at its disposal and has not moved a single millimeter. The truth was always there. Buried under cities, sealed in caves, carved in stone, sitting at the bottom of the sea. It was always there waiting to be found. And now you have found it. What you do with it next is entirely up to you.